Okay, hello. Let's have a look at the Overmind development tool. So what you're seeing here is the website of Overmind, and it's actually written in Overmind. Most of all because we wanted early on to write an application with Overmind, but also because we want to think about documentation a bit differently, kind of like challenge ourselves. What can documentation be? So we have some really cool features that will be really hard to do with a static documentation approach. And we have a lot more ideas that we want to implement as the project moves on. But what we're going to do is just look at the development tool. And what we can see here is the state of the website. So you can see we have an array of APIs. Do we have a current API, demos, what we're loading, and all this stuff. And we can also see that we have triggered some actions. And the first action that triggers here is called onInitialize. And onInitialize is like a special action of Overmind that runs when Overmind instantiates. So this actually allows you to run custom logic within namespaces and stuff. But basically you get to point to Overmind from the inside. That's the point of onInitialize. And what we're doing here is just preparing some stuff. We are using an effect to grab the current theme of the page, which is React, as we can see here. We already have a theme in local storage, which means we don't want to show the little helper pop-up to choose a theme or choose a view. And then we're setting up some routes. The reason we're passing null here is because it's functions. And then we also add a redirect. So when we go to API, it redirects the API action, and then we fire off the router. And when that fires off, it runs the first route, which points to open home, which is an action that is composed of two different actions. The first action just ensures that whatever is on the query, like you see up here, view React TypeScript false, that is handled and put into the state, and we make sure that we set the correct theme on the CSS. And then we actually set the page, and on this action we request the demos, which we can see that we get here, and we set those demos. And the only component that is affected by this is the demo, because we first render it out, but then we do something async here, and then we change the state, which means that the demo will need to render again, or like update itself. And what we can also see here is that we have some components that looks at Overmind. We have, for example, search, which is watching the query and the show search result state. We also have some examples. All the examples are looking at the current theme and TypeScript because they flip when those states change. And we have the demo, which is looking at the demos array. Okay, so let's change something here. Let's jump to guides. And now we can see that the state has been updated to guides, and we should have gotten some guides here, 13 guides. And let's look at the action. Now this action didn't run anything, like the first action didn't run anything because we're still on the same theme. So we can kind of like validate we're not unnecessarily running that code. But the next action sets the page to guides, it's loading the guides, and it's requesting the guides, setting them, and we can see that the guides component has been affected by this update. And again, we have a new component here, guides, looking at the guides, and is loading guides. So let's look at something else here. Let's run test. And let's find that action. It's called change query, and let's look at the first one. So doing search is actually quite complex, and Overmind has a functional API, which we're actually using here. We were actually also using it on the routing because we wanted to reuse a piece of logic, which was that first action, this action here. We wanted to reuse this action across all the routes. because you might enter the site on any route, and we have to make sure that you're looking at the right theme and if you're TypeScript or not. But it's the same thing here, though this is a more complex functional piece of logic, where we initially just set the query in the state, and we are resetting some state. And then we're running a filter. So this filter just checks the length of the query. And we haven't reached required length, so it just renders out and updates search. And then we put in some more text. It's still not long enough. But then we have a long enough query. It goes through the filter. We can see that it's a synthetic event, which is something React does. And then it reaches debounce. But debounce, it doesn't continue after debounce. And the reason is because we typed the last character, T. So debounce kind of like closes down the execution if we get a new call to that action. Which is what we want. Like we want to type something, and only when the user has not typed for 200 milliseconds, that is when we want to run the search, if the query length is long enough. So here we can see the full query running. We went through the filter. It updated the search because we changed the query here. And then we hit a debounce, and it passed through the debounce, ran an action that does a request to search with our search query. And we can see that it received 5 different items. We put that on the state, and it updated search again. So this gives you a lot of insight. We can also see here on the components that we have our search and the view selector and all that stuff. And we can see how many times it has updated. We can also look at flushes. And flushes is basically a record of when Overmind told the components to update. And as you can see, it batches up the mutations, meaning that it doesn't tell the components to update exactly when you change some state. It knows the optimal time to tell the components to update. So it batches up the mutations, and you can see that in this list. You can also run multiple apps. Currently, I'm only running one app. But you can run multiple apps. You can even run multiple Overmind instances in the same application, where you would give them names and they would appear up here. Okay, so this was a quick dive into the dev tool. As you can see, it's really powerful stuff, but we have so much more planned for this development tool. Like now, Overmind is officially announced, and we are just getting our feet warm or something. And when we feel that people are happy about everything, then we will start implementing new features there. I can mention some of them. The first feature will be you can click any of the state here, and you can change it in the development tool, and it will update in your application. Under actions, you will be able to choose, like you have a list of all the possible actions in your app, and you can execute them from the development tool. You will also get a new tab here called History. And History is kind of like the reverse of actions, because here you look at a specific action and then you see all the changes done within that action. But you might run actions at the same time, meaning that you can do mutations in one action and then another action and then go back to the previous action, which means that you should ideally have like a chronological history of all the changes, where you can see what action actually made that change. So that's also coming. It's really nice to understand that flow. And we also have more stuff going on here. But okay, I hope this was a good introduction, and I encourage you to use the development tool, because it's really helpful when you develop your application.